Hello. Now the question of the day is, what is a granny gear transmission? Now this is regarding the 2021 Ford Bronco. Now the 2021 Bronco 7-speed throws down the granny gear gauntlet with the first true crawler gear manual transmission an SUV has since 1991. What is a granny gear transmission? Now, a question a child might ask, but not a childish question. Now, opinions vary on what constitutes a granny tranny, but in a nutshell, it's a manual transmission with an extremely deep first gear ratio that allows the vehicle to crawl along at a super slow pace, akin to that of a kindly old granny shuffling in absolutely no rush to Sunday services. Now, these transmissions type were super common back in the early mid-century, especially in the utilitarian trucks. Some may argue that any first gear ratio that's more than a full point from the next closest gear, for example, NV3550 with a 4.01 to 1 ratio, first and a second ratio being 2.33.2 to second, constitutes a granny gear transmission. But we don't really buy that. Now, granny gear is something that otherwise useless in normal everyday driving. You're not going to use this. You're going to use the 6.68 to 1 first gear in your 1978 Bronco NP 435. Now, every time you pull away from a stoplight, only to bang solidly down several flights of stairs to the second gear, 3.34 to 1 ratio. Are you? Nah. Now, we didn't think so. And it's for that logic that we immediately discount gearboxes like the NV 3550, AX15 T5, and even the NSG 370 6-speed with this 4.46 to 1 ratio. Now, with the relatively low compression 4 and 6 cylinder gas or diesel engines, these absurdly tall first gear ratios between 6 and 7.02 to 1 helped to get the GVW of 10,000 to 30,000 pounds up and moving well enough that second gear could be double clutch on the fly and load could continue down the road. Or if you made it possible for these low horsepower, low torque engines to put loads up steep hills without overwhelming the drivetrain, stalling the engine, and letting the whole shooting match careen back down with gravity, and God help the people that are on the bottom of the hill. But as time and technology advanced, so too did the exception of the manual transmission. Consider that the horsepower and torque levels of the late 80s, the ton SUVs could more than double that of the 1950s over-the-road semi-tractor, and both the need and desire for a super deep first gear ratio was waning. So as the OEs begin using of their supply of granny gear, 4-speed manuals, and SUVs, they began transitioning either to manuals offered closer ratio first gears or omitted the manual option altogether in favor of the overdrive automatic transmission. And boy, does this Bronco look beautiful. All the different angles. Getting back to the gear picture, so we can just take a look. Boy, this is awesome, folks. The Big Ben just hurling down the road. Now, the last granny gear. Now, the granny gear transmissions have never really gone away, At one point in time, GM, Ford, Ram all offered 5 or 6 speed manual transmissions, with the first gear ratio somewhat of 5-to-1 or 6-to-1 neighborhood, and pickup trucks. But by the time the most commonly known variant of these, the NV4500, began appearing in GM trucks in 1992 and the Dodge trucks in 1995, SUVs had more or less given up the option of a manual transmission. Now, the small SUVs like GM S10 Blazer, Jeep Wrangler, Cherokee, Grand Cherokee, at least for a year, and the Ford Explorer, all use aluminum 4, 5, or 6-speed manuals of one form or the other, and they didn't feature a granny gear. Ford used the NP435 in a 6.68-to-1 ratio. The first gear ratio up though the 1986 model year, but in 1987, the 4-speed manual was dropped, and the Mazda Source M50D closed ratio 5-speed was the manual offering. Now, Dodge used the NP435 4-speed in his Ram Charger from the unit's introduction until roughly 1990. Now, we only heard of the anecdotal incidents of the close ratio of the NP445 manuals. Now, in 1991, by the Ram Charger's final year of the UA production, in the A535 5-speed was the manual option. GM was perhaps the last to offer a granny gear transmission with a 6.55-to-1 ratio. Now, that was the first gear. And then the SM465, which was in use through 1991 model year. But even in 1989, these manual transmissions were exceedingly rare in Blazers and Suburbans, SUVs, although they technically built them. Today, you'd be hard-pressed to find a 1990-1991 Blazer or Suburban sporting a factory SM465. Now, so given, the Jeep hasn't used the real granny gear transmission since it discontinued the use of the T18 and the T98 transmission decades ago. Now, if you can even find one, the last SUV with a granny gear transmission was arguably back in 1991 with the Chevy Blazer with the SM465. Then there were here, the Crown. Then there appears to be the Crown. Now, the 2021 Ford Bronco as the last SUV to offer a true granny gear manual transmission. The 7MT1550 7-speed manual transmission option on the 2021 Ford Bronco features a crazy 6.58-to-1 crawler gear. That's what they call it, the crawler gear. But we really know that it's the granny gear in the old school saying, which we call the parlance. Now, the 6.58-to-1 ratio is every bit as deep as those granny geared ratio from the golden age of the cast iron 4-speed and trumps most of the 5 and 6-speed manuals. And the 1-ton pickup buyers have had to choose from in the past few years. Now, the 2021 Ford Bronco 7MT1550 spec, which is what you'll have for the crawler gear, 7-speed, the 6+1 crawler gear, get drag manual offered on the 2.3-liter engine only, which Ford, as you can hear my nails banging, is in the midst of changing. Now, the crawler gear being 6.588-to-1, and the first gear being 4.238-to-1, and the second gear being 2.365-to-1, and the third gear being 1.453-to-1, and as you see, the numbers are getting lower and lower. The fourth gear being 1.000-to-1, and the fifth gear being 0.776-to-1, which means for every time that engine turns, for every time it turns, it's one ratio. So you have the sixth gear, and every time it turns 0.646 to 1 ratio, that's a full turn of that axle. In reverse gear being, of course, 5.625 to 1. And you check out that crawler gear, which is higher, which means that car can creep along, or the SUV can creep along. Now check out the gear ratios of the new Ford Bronco on the 7MT 1550 and see for yourself if you agree that its first granny gear transmission since the last offered back in 1991 on a Chevy Blazer. So it was last offered an SUV 30 years ago. So the Wrangler's turn The granny gear gauntlet has been thrown. Now, what you gonna do, Jeep? Are you gonna be able to meet the 2021 Bronco on his own turf? I don't think so, folks. So those who are getting a Bronco, you made a smart, wise choice. And get it in a manual gear so you can creep alone and find yourself in some crazy, crazy situations. Which means you might get some dings and some dents. But don't fret, because you can easily take off the body panels and replace them. You guys, thanks for watching. It's A Automotive Reviews. And have an awesome day. And remember, like, share, and subscribe.
If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more interesting videos.